66 million years of silence. And still, it keeps telling us things we did not know. Tyrannosaurus rex is the most studied predator in the history of paleontology. More than a century of excavation, thousands of scientific papers, entire careers devoted to a single animal. And yet, in the past few months alone, some of the most fundamental ideas about it have changed. Not adjusted, not refined, changed. The image the world has carried for over 100 years, the one built into every museum, every film, every childhood, turns out to have been missing things, significant things, things that were hiding not in some undiscovered fossil bed, but in museum collections that scientists had already walked past thousands of times. That is the part that is difficult to reconcile. The answers were already found. They were simply not recognized yet. What those fossils revealed about how this animal began its life, how it hunted, and how large it could truly become, has forced researchers to go back to assumptions that have stood for decades and ask whether any of them were ever built on solid ground. Some were not. In the face of the most recognizable predator that ever lived, may not look the way anyone has ever drawn it. An animal this famous, this heavily studied, this deeply embedded in the human imagination, and it is still rewriting its own story. When the name Tyrannosaurus rex first entered science in 1905, it carried immediate weight. Dr. Henry Fairfield Osborn introduced the animal from fossils housed at the American Museum of Natural History in New York, giving it a title that translated to Tyrant Lizard King. From scattered bones, an image began to take shape. Museums displayed towering skeletons standing upright, their tails resting across the ground, their bodies balanced like oversized kangaroos. Many researchers pictured a sluggish scavenger, built more for intimidation than pursuit. That portrait settled comfortably into public imagination and remained there for decades. Gradually, new discoveries began pulling the skeleton into a different posture. Bones revealed that the tail stretched outward for balance instead of dragging behind. The hips and legs suggested an animal capable of purposeful movement, not a lumbering giant wandering from carcass to carcass. During the dinosaur renaissance of the 1970s, Dr. Robert Bacher argued that this predator possessed a more energetic body, perhaps even a warm-blooded metabolism. The old picture faded, replaced by one that seemed sharper and more dynamic. Confidence returned, although many assumptions beneath the surface remained surprisingly fragile. Among those accepted ideas were beliefs that the species hunted alone, reached adulthood rapidly, possessed an established maximum size, and had a lifespan already understood. Its teeth were almost always illustrated protruding beyond uncovered jaws, while its behavior became increasingly defined through repetition instead of direct evidence. Every reconstruction leaned upon earlier reconstructions, strengthening conclusions that often rested upon limited fossil material. The image appeared stable because it had been copied so many times. Popular culture gave those ideas remarkable staying power. In 1993, a single film carried one particular version of Tyrannosaurus rex into homes across the world. Audiences encountered an enormous territorial predator with permanently exposed teeth and relentless confidence. That appearance became deeply familiar, although much of it reflected artistic preference more than fresh scientific discovery. Once millions had accepted that vision, separating evidence from expectation became increasingly difficult. The deeper challenge came from the fossils themselves. Across more than 120 years of excavation, paleontologists uncovered only about 100 individuals attributed to Tyrannosaurus rex. Among those, merely 32 represented well-preserved adult skeletons, capable of supporting detailed anatomical study. Researchers estimate that roughly 2.5 billion individuals lived during the species' existence. Every broad conclusion emerged from a fraction so tiny that it bordered on unimaginable. The fossil record offered precious insight, yet enormous stretches of variation almost certainly vanished forever. One absence proved especially striking. Despite generations devoted to studying this famous predator, no confirmed hatchling had ever been identified. Scientists discussed nests, eggs, growth, and reproduction through comparisons with living relatives and other dinosaurs, building careful models without direct evidence from the earliest stage of life. Those ideas were thoughtful, sometimes persuasive, though every one of them rested upon inference instead of observation. For more than a century, that missing beginning lingered as one of paleontology's largest unanswered chapters. Then, on July 7th, 2026, attention settled upon a modest fossil resting inside a museum drawer. Its size had encouraged countless people to overlook it. Its story had waited patiently until someone finally recognized what had been there all along. Across the shelves of natural history museums, countless fossils spend decades resting inside carefully labeled drawers. Many are fragments, too small to anchor dramatic displays, too incomplete to attract sustained attention. They remain preserved, cataloged, and available, waiting for someone to notice details that earlier generations overlooked. During the summer of 2026, one of those overlooked pieces transformed the opening chapter of Tyrannosaurus Rex life. On July 7th, 2026, the peer reviewed journal Biology published a study led by Dr. Nicholas Longrich of the University of Bath, together with researchers from Oklahoma State University, the Royal Saskatchewan Museum, and several collaborating institutions. Their investigation did not begin at a fresh excavation site. It began inside museum collections, where small fossil fragments from earlier discoveries were being examined with renewed care. The work focused on isolated bones that had attracted little interest because they seemed too ordinary to reveal much at all. Among those specimens rested a partial third metatarsal, the middle bone of the foot, collected from the Frenchman Formation in Saskatchewan, Canada. It had been catalogued for years without receiving a confident identity. During close examination, its surface displayed an intricate network of tiny openings formed by blood vessels. Such porous texture appears in bones growing at remarkable speed, marking an individual at the earliest stage of life. Every ridge and channel carried evidence of youth, preserved across 66 million years. Comparison followed with known meat eating dinosaurs from the late Cretaceous. Researchers measured proportions, studied microscopic structure, and evaluated the anatomy against every realistic candidate. One possibility continued matching, while the others gradually fell away. The specimen belonged to Tyrannosaurus rex. Dr. Longrich summarized the discovery in direct language, saying, "This is the foot bone of a very, very tiny Tyrannosaurus rex. This is the smallest Tyrannosaurus rex we have ever seen." That identification encouraged the team to revisit additional neglected fossils scattered through museum collections around the world. Small teeth, isolated limb bones, and fragments once considered too incomplete for confident study were examined again. Several proved to belong to hatchling Tyrannosaurus rex individuals. These animals had already emerged from their eggs and were living independently. They differed from embryos, and they also differed from Nanotyrannus, the smaller tyrannosaur species recently recognized as separate after decades of debate. Dr. Longrich also explained why these fossils had remained unnoticed for so long. Paleontologists, he observed, often devote greater attention to spectacular skulls and nearly complete skeletons than to isolated fragments. The smallest specimens naturally receive less study, creating an unintended bias that leaves valuable evidence waiting in storage. Nothing about the hatchling bones required extraordinary luck to uncover. Their importance depended upon someone deciding that even a modest fragment deserved the same careful scrutiny as a giant skull. The discovery offered a reminder that scientific progress sometimes arrives without another shovel entering the ground. Fossils collected years earlier still carried information that had never been fully read. A bone no larger than a thumb preserved the earliest confirmed glimpse of the world's most famous predator after hatching, extending its story into a stage of life that had remained beyond direct evidence for more than a century. A single foot bone can reveal far more than the shape of a foot. Growth leaves patterns throughout the skeleton, and once the newly identified hatchling material was assembled, an entirely different portrait of the youngest Tyrannosaurus rex began to emerge. The earliest stage of this animal's life no longer belonged to careful speculation alone. It carried dimensions, proportions, and even traces of behavior written into fossilized bone. The hatchling measured about 30 inches from nose to tail and weighed roughly 5.5 pounds. Researchers suggested that the animal may have weighed as little as 3.7 pounds at the instant it emerged from its egg, before its first meal's added mass. Earlier estimates had placed newborn tyrannosaurs much closer to 39 inches in length. The revised evidence reduced those expectations dramatically, placing the young predator within the size range of an ordinary house cat instead of a much larger juvenile reptile. Its small body did not resemble a helpless infant. The legs already stretched long beneath the torso, built with the same overall proportions that would later support one of the largest land predators ever known. The bones displayed familiar structural relationships seen in mature individuals, only reduced to miniature scale. Even the foot that first revealed the discovery possessed features immediately recognizable as belonging to Tyrannosaurus rex, preserving the same architectural blueprint that adulthood would later magnify thousands of times. The greatest surprise came from the teeth. Dr. Eric Snively of Oklahoma State University explained that the foot bone carried every hallmark of a giant adult, differing mainly through its slimmer proportions. He added that the teeth were chunky and already worn, showing that these hatchlings bit into bone just as a fully grown Tyrannosaurus rex shattered the skeleton of a large Triceratops. Those few words transformed the earliest chapter of this animal's existence. Enamel does not wear without repeated contact. Under microscopic examination, the tips displayed damage consistent with striking hard material again and again. Fresh hatchlings were not nibbling soft scraps provided by attentive parents. They were feeding independently within days of leaving the egg, tackling prey and carcasses sturdy enough to leave permanent marks across newly formed teeth. Even at only a few pounds, their jaws were already performing the same essential task that defined adults throughout the remainder of life. That finding also revealed remarkable continuity in the species. The specialized equipment responsible for crushing bone did not appear gradually after years of growth. It arrived at the very beginning. Adult jaws generated extraordinary power through greater size and stronger muscles, yet the underlying design had already been established in miniature. Development enlarged the machinery instead of replacing it with something different. From hatchling to giant, the feeding strategy remained fundamentally the same. Seen together, these discoveries replaced the image of a vulnerable youngster with something far more distinctive. A creature scarcely larger than a family pet entered the world carrying the body plan, teeth, and instincts of a future apex predator. Growth would unfold across many years, though its role within the ecosystem had already begun almost immediately. The smallest confirmed Tyrannosaurus rex ever identified possessed every indication that it had entered life prepared to hunt, feed, and survive on its own from the very start. The smallest members of a species often reveal the largest patterns. Once the newly recognized hatchlings established a reliable starting point, paleontologists could begin working backward toward the nest itself. Adult skeletons had long dominated discussions about Tyrannosaurus rex, yet those tiny bones opened an entirely different line of reasoning. By tracing growth in reverse, researchers gained the first meaningful mathematical glimpse of eggs that had never been found. No complete, confirmed Tyrannosaurus rex egg has ever been discovered. Fragments of large dinosaur eggs exist from the closing chapters of the Age of Dinosaurs, but none can be assigned with certainty to this famous predator. The hatchling fossils changed that situation. Using established relationships between egg size, hatchling size, and body growth observed across reptiles and birds, scientists estimated that the eggs were surprisingly modest for an animal capable of reaching roughly 9 tons in adulthood. The giant at the end of the story had begun inside an egg far smaller than many researchers had imagined. Those calculations also offered insight into the number of eggs that could have occupied a single nest. Scaling relationships, drawn from living reptiles and birds, pointed toward clutches containing about 20 to 30 eggs as the strongest estimate. Some broader models allowed the possibility of much larger clutches, perhaps reaching 50 or even 100 eggs under unusual conditions, though current evidence favors the smaller range. Even that conservative estimate painted a striking picture. A single nesting season may have released dozens of young predators into the landscape at once. Living birds provide an illuminating comparison because they represent the closest surviving relatives of nonavian dinosaurs. Many large birds produce only 1 to 3 eggs during a breeding attempt. Parents devote tremendous energy to incubation, protection, feeding, and prolonged care after hatching. Success depends upon raising a small number of offspring with sustained attention. The emerging portrait of Tyrannosaurus rex followed a different path. Biologists often describe reproductive strategies along a broad spectrum. One approach emphasizes producing many offspring while investing relatively little care in each individual. Small mammals, such as rodents, commonly follow this pattern, increasing the chance that at least some young survive. Another approach favors producing only a few offspring while providing extensive parental care. Whales and humans illustrate that strategy, where survival depends heavily upon long periods of protection and learning. Evidence now suggests that Tyrannosaurus rex occupied a position between those two extremes, though noticeably closer to the side, emphasizing greater numbers than many expected for such an enormous apex predator. Dr. Nicholas Longrich explained that tyrannosaurs appear transitional between reptiles, such as crocodilians and turtles on one side, and modern birds on the other. Intensive parental investment characteristic of birds and mammals, he noted, seems to have evolved gradually throughout the Mesozoic era rather than appearing all at once. That interpretation carries practical consequences for understanding survival. If a nest contained 20 to 30 hatchlings already capable of feeding independently, substantial losses during the earliest weeks would not necessarily threaten the population. Natural selection could tolerate considerable mortality because reproduction produced many opportunities for success within every generation. The image that emerges is unlike the one once imagined. Instead of a single treasured youngster receiving months of careful attention, an entire brood scattered into the forests soon after hatching. Dozens of compact predators, each equipped with the same fundamental feeding machinery carried by adults, dispersed through the late Cretaceous landscape. Their beginning depended less upon prolonged care than upon numbers, resilience, and the remarkable design already present from the first days of life. Some fossils preserve an entire skeleton, others preserve a single instant. One remarkable specimen captured the exact moment when predator and prey met with such force that a broken tooth remained where the attack ended. Across 66 million years, neither erosion nor burial disturbed that tiny fragment. It remained locked inside another animal's skull, preserving a scene no observer could ever have witnessed. The discovery reached broad public attention during July of 2026, although the scientific study had already appeared earlier that year in the journal PeerJ. The research was led by doctoral researcher Taya Weinberg, Hensler of the University of Alberta, together with Dr. John Scannella of Montana State University's Museum of the Rockies. Their investigation centered on a fossil known as Museum of the Rockies specimen 1627, a remarkably complete skull belonging to Edmontosaurus, the broad-billed plant eater that shared the closing landscapes of the Late Cretaceous with Tyrannosaurus rex. The skull had been unearthed during 2005 from the Hell Creek Formation of eastern Montana before entering the collections of the Museum of the Rockies in Bozeman. Years later, careful examination revealed an astonishing detail. Buried inside the nasal bone rested the broken tip of a carnivorous dinosaur tooth. It had entered the skull during a violent bite, snapped under tremendous pressure, and remained sealed within the bone ever since. Embedded teeth are exceptionally uncommon. Bite marks appear on dinosaur bones with some regularity, yet they rarely identify the attacker beyond reasonable suspicion. Taya Weinberg Hensler explained that an embedded tooth changes that entirely because it identifies both the victim and the animal responsible for the wound. The tooth itself becomes direct evidence carried inside the prey, instead of a mark left upon the surface. Researchers relied upon computed tomography scanning together with detailed measurements of tooth shape, curvature, and serration patterns. Every meat-eating dinosaur known from the Hell Creek Formation was considered during comparison. One candidate consistently matched every feature. The broken tooth belonged to Tyrannosaurus rex. Its dimensions and distinctive cutting edges aligned with no other predator living in that ecosystem. The surrounding bone revealed another crucial detail. No healing appeared around the embedded fragment. Living bone responds to injury by repairing damaged tissue, gradually smoothing fractured surfaces. That process never began. The Edmontosaurus died before recovery could even start, leaving the tooth fixed exactly where it entered during the fatal encounter. The fossil preserves the outcome with remarkable clarity. Its position also mattered. The tooth lodged within the front of the skull, penetrating the nasal bone across the face itself. It did not strike the neck or the side of the body. Taya Weinberg Hensler noted that such placement suggests the victim confronted its attacker directly, a pattern commonly associated with predatory kills. The final encounter unfolded face to face, ending in a crushing bite delivered with extraordinary force. Enough pressure traveled through the tooth for its tip to fracture after driving deep into solid bone. That failure did not represent weakness. Carnivorous dinosaur teeth were continually replaced throughout life, making the loss of one tip a small cost during a successful attack. The broken fragment remained inside the skull while the predator continued on, leaving behind a piece of itself that would become one of paleontology's clearest records of a fatal strike. Power can be measured in many ways, yet one figure stands apart because it explains several discoveries at once. A tiny hatchling already carried teeth built for striking bone. An adult left the broken tip of a tooth buried inside the face of another dinosaur. Those observations point toward the same underlying mechanism. The jaws of Tyrannosaurus rex operated with forces far beyond what earlier generations of paleontologists believed possible. A comprehensive study published in scientific reports by researchers from Florida State University and Oklahoma State University produced the strongest modern estimate of that capability. Their modeling combined detailed skull anatomy, reconstructed jaw muscles, and advanced engineering techniques to calculate how much force the animal could generate while closing its jaws. The result exceeded 7,800 pounds of pressure. Imagining three small cars pressing together at the same instant offers a rough sense of the tremendous compression delivered during a single bite. That estimate transformed decades of previous thinking. Earlier calculations suggested a bite force of roughly 2,000 pounds. The new work increased the figure by almost 4 times, placing Tyrannosaurus rex in an entirely different mechanical category. It no longer possessed merely a powerful bite for a terrestrial predator. It occupied a level unmatched by any known land animal. Comparison with living species makes the difference even clearer. The saltwater crocodile, generally recognized as the strongest biting animal alive today, produces about 3,700 pounds of bite force. That impressive performance reaches less than half the revised estimate for Tyrannosaurus rex. Even the great white shark, another predator famous for extraordinary jaws, generates roughly 4,000 pounds. The dinosaur surpassed that benchmark as well, while operating entirely on land, where supporting such forces required an exceptionally robust skull and neck. Raw force alone, however, cannot explain shattered skeletons. Pressure matters just as much. Pressure depends upon concentrating force into an extremely small area. The teeth of Tyrannosaurus rex accomplished exactly that. Researchers calculated tooth pressures approaching 431,000 pounds per square inch at the tips of individual teeth. Every closing bite focused enormous energy through remarkably compact contact points. Modern crocodiles illustrate the distinction. Their jaws clamp with tremendous strength, allowing them to seize prey and maintain an unbreakable hold. Their teeth, however, are shaped differently. They excel at gripping rather than splintering dense bone. The teeth of adult Tyrannosaurus rex were thicker and more rounded across their cross section, creating tools capable of driving concentrated pressure deep into skeletal tissue. Instead of bending under stress, bone often fractured suddenly into multiple pieces. The fossil record preserves the results. Skeletons of Triceratops and Edmontosaurus display shattered edges, crushed surfaces, and breakage patterns consistent with explosive failure rather than gradual grinding. Those injuries match predictions from modern engineering analyses with remarkable precision. The physical evidence and the mathematical models reinforce one another across millions of years. That understanding also clarifies the embedded tooth described earlier. During the fatal strike, the tooth penetrated the nasal bone until resistance exceeded what even its own structure could endure. The tip fractured while the surrounding bone captured it forever. The failure occurred because the bite driving it forward had reached extraordinary intensity. What remained inside the skull was not evidence of weakness, but the lasting signature of one of the most powerful jaws ever to evolve on Earth. Every predator leaves behind a different signature on the landscape. Some consume flesh and move on. Others return repeatedly until little remains. Tyrannosaurus rex belonged to an even rarer category, one defined by access to nourishment that most other hunters could never reach. Its extraordinary jaws transformed skeletons from discarded remains into valuable stores of food, giving the species an ecological role unlike any other large terrestrial predator known from its time. Deep inside, every large bone lies marrow, a soft tissue rich in fat, protein, and essential minerals. Compared with muscle alone, marrow contains an exceptionally concentrated supply of energy. For many predators, however, that resource remains sealed away behind dense walls of bone. Long after exposed flesh disappears, the richest portion of a carcass can remain trapped within the skeleton, inaccessible to animals lacking the proper tools to reach it. The late Cretaceous landscape supported numerous meat-eating dinosaurs besides Tyrannosaurus rex. Smaller hunters, such as Dromaeosaurus, Troodon, and Dacotaraptor, possessed sharp teeth well suited for slicing flesh. They could strip muscle from a carcass with remarkable efficiency, yet the thick leg bones and massive pelvis of large plant eaters resisted their efforts. Once the available meat had been removed, much of the remaining nutritional value stayed locked inside the skeleton. For Tyrannosaurus rex, the story continued long after other predators had departed. Its reinforced teeth and exceptional jaw mechanics allowed it to fracture large bones, exposing marrow that few competitors could exploit. A carcass abandoned by nearly every other hunter still represented a substantial source of nourishment. Thousands of additional calories remained available within the broken skeleton itself, extending the usefulness of every successful hunt or fortunate scavenging opportunity. Fossils preserve evidence of this repeated feeding behavior. One Triceratops pelvis bears more than 80 separate bite marks attributed to Tyrannosaurus rex. The distribution of those marks suggests sustained feeding instead of a single brief encounter. The same individual may have returned across multiple days, continuing to process the skeleton after softer tissues had already disappeared. Each visit extracted resources unavailable to almost every other carnivore sharing the environment. Further confirmation comes from fossilized dung, known scientifically as coprolites. These preserved remains contain unusually high concentrations of phosphorus and calcium, chemical signatures expected when large quantities of bone pass through the digestive system. Such evidence demonstrates that bone consumption formed a regular part of the animal's diet rather than an occasional response to hunger or unusual circumstances. Crushing skeletons was an ordinary aspect of feeding, woven into the biology of the species. This ability also reshaped relationships among predators. Instead of competing directly for exactly the same portions of every carcass, different hunters could specialize in different resources. Smaller carnivores removed flesh efficiently, while Tyrannosaurus rex harvested what remained afterward. That division reduced direct competition and allowed multiple predatory species to occupy the same ecosystem while relying upon different portions of shared prey. Processing so much bone carried broader consequences as well. By breaking skeletons apart and digesting their contents, Tyrannosaurus rex accelerated the return of phosphorus and calcium to the soil. Nutrients that otherwise would have remained locked inside durable bones re-entered the environment more rapidly, enriching the forests of Laramidia through ordinary feeding activity. The newly recognized hatchlings extend this pattern back to the beginning of life. Their worn teeth reveal that bone consumption did not emerge only after adulthood. From animals weighing only a few pounds to giants approaching 9 tons, the same feeding strategy remained present throughout every stage of growth, binding the entire species together through one remarkably consistent ecological design. The largest animal ever discovered is not always the largest animal that ever lived. Fossils preserve only an extraordinary fraction of vanished life, and every skeleton lifted from stone represents a survivor of countless accidents that favored preservation over decay. That simple reality has gradually changed how paleontologists think about the upper limits of Tyrannosaurus rex, shifting attention from the biggest specimen on display to the far larger individuals that statistics suggest once walked the earth. For many years, the benchmark seemed secure. The specimen, known as Scotty, uncovered in Saskatchewan, Canada, stood as the undisputed giant of its species. Estimates placed its living weight at about 19,500 pounds, with a body stretching roughly 42 feet from snout to tail. Museums, documentaries, and scientific discussions commonly treated Scotty as the practical ceiling for Tyrannosaurus rex. If a larger individual had existed, many assumed it would already have been found. That assumption changed during July of 2024, when paleontologists Jordan Mallon and David Hone published a study in Ecology and Evolution approaching the question from an entirely different direction. Instead of asking what the largest known fossil measured, they asked what the largest living animal was statistically expected to have been. Their work combined estimates of population size, growth curves, variation in lifespan, and the extraordinarily low probability that any individual would become fossilized, survive erosion, and eventually be discovered by people. The results pointed toward a striking conclusion. The largest known skeletons do not necessarily represent the biological maximum for the species. According to their model, famous giants such as Scotty occupy approximately the 99th percentile of body size. Reaching the 99th percentile means an individual is exceptionally large, though it does not define the absolute limit. Somewhere beyond that already remarkable threshold, even larger animals almost certainly existed. Their calculations suggested that the greatest Tyrannosaurus rex may have reached roughly 15 tons, while extending close to 49 feet in length. Such an animal would have weighed about 30,000 pounds, approximately 70% more massive than Scotty. Its bulk would have exceeded the combined weight of two adult African elephants, creating a predator substantially larger than any skeleton presently mounted in a museum gallery. The absence of such a fossil does not weaken the conclusion. It reflects the overwhelming rarity of preservation. Researchers estimated that discovering a Tyrannosaurus rex from approximately the 99.99 percentile of body size could require around 1,000 additional years of fossil excavation if discoveries continue at today's pace. Geological chance governs the process as much as scientific effort, leaving many extraordinary individuals concealed within rocks that have never reached the surface. That perspective becomes even more compelling when viewed against the scale of the species itself. Paleontologists estimate that roughly 2.5 billion Tyrannosaurus rex individuals lived during the existence of the species. Only about 100 specimens have ever been recovered, and merely 32 represent well-preserved adult skeletons. Every famous fossil belongs to an unimaginably small sample drawn from a population spanning millions of years. Seen in that light, the towering skeletons filling natural history museums become something unexpected. They remain magnificent examples of one of Earth's greatest predators, yet they almost certainly do not represent its ultimate form. Somewhere within layers of untouched rock, a larger Tyrannosaurus rex may still rest exactly where it fell, carrying dimensions no human eyes have measured and preserving another chapter of a story that remains incomplete. Time leaves its record inside bone long after flesh has vanished. Every season of growth adds another layer, another subtle mark carried deep within the skeleton. For decades, Those records rested inside famous Tyrannosaurus rex fossils without revealing everything they contained. The evidence was present from the beginning, waiting for a different way of looking. During March of 2026, a study published in Peer J presented the largest investigation of Tyrannosaurus rex growth ever assembled. Led by Dr. Holly Woodward of Oklahoma State University, the research examined 17 individual specimens spanning different stages of life. Together, they formed a timeline far more complete than any previous collection, allowing researchers to follow development from youth into maturity with unprecedented detail. The breakthrough depended upon polarized light microscopy, a method that passes carefully controlled wavelengths of light through thin slices of fossilized bone. Under ordinary examination, many internal structures remain difficult to distinguish. Polarized light reveals microscopic growth rings that resemble the annual rings preserved inside the trunk of a tree. These delicate patterns had existed inside well-known fossils for decades. The bones themselves had not changed. The ability to read their hidden record had. Earlier models suggested that Tyrannosaurus rex experienced an explosive growth period during its teenage years before reaching full size at roughly 25 years of age. Most reconstructions assumed adulthood arrived comparatively early, followed by only a few remaining years before death. That picture had shaped museum exhibits, scientific illustrations, and countless discussions of dinosaur biology. The new evidence extended that timeline dramatically. Instead of completing growth near 25 years, Tyrannosaurus rex continued adding substantial mass until approximately 35 to 40 years of age. An individual weighing about 8 tons reached its greatest size only after another 15 years of steady development beyond earlier expectations. Growth slowed with age, though it did not end nearly as soon as paleontologists once believed. Viewed across an entire lifetime, the transformation becomes extraordinary. A hatchling weighing only 5.5 pounds entered the world already equipped for the same feeding strategy that defined the species. From that modest beginning, its skeleton expanded continuously for as many as 4 decades, eventually supporting thousands of times more body mass. Few land animals known to science display such an extended and dramatic growth trajectory within a single lifetime. The revised timeline also changes the meaning of many famous fossils. Numerous individuals that dominate museum collections died at around 30 years of age. According to the new analysis, those animals had not yet reached their maximum body mass. They were still growing when their lives ended. Fully mature 40-year-old giants would have been considerably less common, making their preservation even less likely within the geological conditions required for fossilization. As researchers compared growth patterns across the 17 specimens, another unexpected result emerged. Two well-known fossils, nicknamed Jane and Petey, differed noticeably from the developmental trends followed by the rest of the sample. Their microscopic growth records did not align comfortably with the broader pattern expected for young Tyrannosaurus rex. The difference was substantial enough to encourage renewed consideration of an idea that had remained controversial for decades. Perhaps these familiar skeletons represented something other than unusually shaped juveniles. Hidden within their bones, the same growth rings that clarified the life history of Tyrannosaurus rex also hinted that another story had been waiting beside it all along. Few scientific debates endure for an entire generation, yet some fossils resist simple answers. Shelves filled with carefully labeled bones can preserve uncertainty as faithfully as they preserve anatomy. For almost 40 years, one small tyrannosaur carried a name that many researchers accepted and many others rejected, while every new discovery seemed only to deepen the disagreement. The animal was Nanotyrannus lancensis, whose name means dwarf tyrant. It entered scientific literature during 1988, although the original fossil had been collected from Montana decades earlier, during 1942. From the beginning, its graceful proportions stood apart from the massive frame expected of Tyrannosaurus rex. Even so, another explanation remained possible. Perhaps these bones belonged to a growing youngster that had simply not reached adulthood. That question divided paleontology for decades. Some researchers argued that every supposed Nanotyrannus represented a juvenile Tyrannosaurus rex, still developing toward the heavier skull and sturdier proportions seen in adults. Others maintained that the differences were too consistent to disappear through growth alone. Scientific meetings, journal articles, and museum collections reflected the disagreement, with the same fossils interpreted in fundamentally different ways depending upon the researcher examining them. A decisive breakthrough arrived on the 4th of November, 2025. Research published in Nature, one of the world's most influential scientific journals, concluded that Nanotyrannus represented a genuine species rather than a youthful stage of Tyrannosaurus rex. The conclusion reshaped decades of interpretation by demonstrating that paleontologists had been comparing two different predators instead of different ages of the same one. The strongest evidence emerged from the celebrated dueling dinosaurs fossil discovered in Montana. Preserved together were a horned dinosaur and a smaller tyrannosaur, apparently locked in their final encounter. Among the many remarkable bones recovered from this specimen was a delicate structure from the throat called the hyoid bone. This small bone supports muscles associated with the tongue and throat, yet it rarely survives fossilization because of its fragile nature. Microscopic examination revealed growth rings within the hyoid bone, much like those found elsewhere in the skeleton. The pattern showed that growth had already stopped. This individual had reached skeletal maturity. It was not an immature Tyrannosaurus rex awaiting another stage of development. Additional study of the internal bone architecture reached the same conclusion. The microscopic organization matched that of a fully grown animal instead of one still actively enlarging its skeleton. External anatomy reinforced the microscopic evidence. Nanotyrannus possessed narrower jaws, relatively longer legs, proportionally larger arms, and a greater number of teeth than Tyrannosaurus rex. These differences remained consistent across specimens and could not be explained as temporary stages within normal growth. They described a separate evolutionary path, producing a predator built with its own distinctive proportions. Dr. Lindsay Zano of North Carolina State University summarized the significance by explaining that the fossil did more than settle an old argument. It overturned decades of research built upon mistaken identity. Fossils long catalogued, cited, and analyzed as juvenile Tyrannosaurus rex belonged to another species altogether. That realization echoes through every previous discussion of Tyrannosaurus rex development. The already limited collection of confirmed juveniles becomes even smaller once these mistaken identities are removed. It also casts fresh light upon Jane and Petey, the unusual specimens highlighted in the recent growth study. Their unexpected growth patterns now fit naturally within a different species, resolving an inconsistency that had lingered through decades of careful investigation. A landscape can appear familiar until one missing piece is restored. The rivers, forests, and floodplains of the Hell Creek Formation have long been imagined with a single giant tyrannosaur dominating every hunt. Recent discoveries encourage a richer picture. The same ground preserved evidence that two different tyrannosaur species shared the region at the same time, each following its own path through the living community. Fossils of both Tyrannosaurus rex and Nanotyrannus occur within the Hell Creek Formation, showing that they occupied overlapping territory during the closing chapter of the Age of Dinosaurs. They were not separated by millions of years, replacing one another through evolution. They lived together. Their footprints may have crossed the same riverbanks, and the animals around them had to navigate the presence of both. Even though they belong to the same broader family, their bodies reveal contrasting ways of surviving. Tyrannosaurus rex matured gradually, accumulated enormous mass, and carried the reinforced jaws capable of breaking apart large bones. Every recent study, from feeding behavior to growth history, points toward a predator specializing in powerful attacks against substantial prey, followed by efficient use of nearly every edible part of the carcass. Its strength extended beyond the initial kill into prolonged feeding that few competitors could match. Nanotyrannus occupied a different role. Adults measured roughly 20 feet in length, making them only about half as long as mature Tyrannosaurus rex. Their skeletons carried proportionally longer legs, narrower jaws, and a greater number of teeth, arranged for gripping rather than crushing. Those features suggest an animal built for speed, rapid pursuit, and control of smaller, more agile prey. Instead of confronting the largest plant eaters on the landscape, it likely focused upon animals better suited to its lighter frame. Ecologists describe collections of predators sharing one environment as a predator guild. A guild consists of different species, exploiting related resources, while reducing direct competition through distinct hunting strategies or preferred prey. Modern African grasslands provide familiar examples. Lions, leopards, cheetahs, and African wild dogs all occupy the same broad habitat, yet each emphasizes different techniques, body sizes, and prey choices. The result is a community shaped through specialization instead of constant conflict. The Hell Creek ecosystem appears to have operated according to similar principles. Large horned dinosaurs, duck-billed herbivores, swift smaller animals, and many intermediate species all created opportunities for hunters with different abilities. Rather than competing for identical meals every day, Tyrannosaurus rex and Nanotyrannus could divide available resources through differences in size, speed, and feeding behavior. Such partitioning allowed multiple formidable predators to thrive within the same environment. The recent hatchling discovery introduces another layer to this arrangement. Newly emerged Tyrannosaurus rex, weighing only 5.5 pounds, could not have pursued the enormous prey targeted by adults. They occupied an entirely different ecological position, searching among low vegetation for small mammals, lizards, and young dinosaurs. As they matured over decades, they gradually shifted through changing roles until eventually reaching the apex of the food web. Seen together, these discoveries replace the image of a single dominant hunter with something far more intricate. Across one shared landscape lived swift adult Nanotyrannus, growing Tyrannosaurus rex of many ages, and colossal mature giants, each interacting with different prey and different opportunities. Every herbivore crossing those floodplains faced a layered network of tyrannosaur pressure, extending from the smallest ground-level hunter to the largest bone-crushing predator the continent had ever produced. Predators rarely change alone. Every improvement in speed, strength, or feeding strategy becomes part of a larger conversation written across an entire ecosystem. As new discoveries reshape the biology of Tyrannosaurus rex, they also reshape the lives of the animals that shared its world. Each revised predator demands a revised understanding of its prey, and one remarkable fossil has brought that relationship into unusually sharp focus. The embedded tooth, described during July of 2026, represents more than an unusual injury. It preserves a direct moment of interaction between hunter and victim. Unlike conclusions drawn only from skeletal proportions or tooth shape, this fossil records behavior itself. The broken tooth remained lodged inside the nasal bone of an Edmontosaurus, preserving physical evidence of an attack that unfolded during the animal's final moments. Its location carries particular significance. The tooth pierced the front of the skull instead of entering through the side of the body or the hindquarters. That placement indicates a face to face encounter. At least in this instance, Tyrannosaurus rex confronted its prey directly rather than relying upon an attack from behind. The fossil captures an instant when predator and herbivore met head on, leaving behind evidence more persuasive than any theoretical reconstruction. That discovery encourages renewed examination of Edmontosaurus itself. Recent studies suggest these large plant eaters possessed more elaborate soft tissue crest structures than earlier reconstructions recognized. Those crests may have helped generate or amplify low frequency sounds capable of traveling across large herds. Communication over long distances would have improved coordination and early warning when danger approached, allowing many individuals to react together instead of separately. A predator facing such a network of alert animals would have benefited from closing the remaining distance with speed and commitment before the herd could fully respond. Other familiar herbivores have also acquired new dimensions through recent research. Fossil assemblages containing multiple triceratops, individuals of different ages suggest that these horned dinosaurs sometimes lived in social groups instead of existing primarily as solitary animals. Their impressive horns appear increasingly associated with contests among members of their own species, where display, competition, and ritualized combat shaped their evolution. Against the crushing bite now documented for Tyrannosaurus rex, survival after a direct strike to the skull would have been extraordinarily unlikely regardless of horn length. Evidence from Ankylosaurus tells another part of the story. Biomechanical studies of its famous tail club indicate that the most effective swings targeted the lower legs and feet of an approaching predator. The geometry of those powerful strikes aligns closely with the expected movement of a charging Tyrannosaurus rex. Instead of aiming randomly, the armored dinosaur appears adapted to disrupt balance and locomotion before the attacker could deliver a decisive bite. Viewed together, these discoveries reveal an evolutionary contest unfolding across millions of years. Greater offensive power in one lineage encouraged stronger defensive responses in another. Heavy armor, reinforced skulls, coordinated herds, and specialized weapons developed alongside increasingly capable predators. No participant evolved in isolation. Every adaptation altered the selective pressures experienced by the others, gradually shaping a community whose members continuously influenced one another. The embedded tooth preserves one brief encounter within that larger process. It reminds us that fossils sometimes capture actions as well as anatomy, preserving traces of movement, conflict, and survival instead of bones alone. Each new specimen refines both sides of the relationship, showing that understanding Tyrannosaurus rex has always required understanding the remarkable animals that stood before it. Sometimes an idea becomes so familiar that it begins to feel like evidence. For generations, the resting face of Tyrannosaurus rex seemed fixed in the public imagination, jaws slightly open, enormous teeth permanently exposed to the air. That image appeared in films, museum, artwork, books, and toys until it became almost impossible to separate from the animal itself. Yet the scientific foundation for that appearance proved far less substantial than many people realized. On the 30th of March, 2023, Dr. Thomas Cullen of Auburn University and Dr. Derek Larson of the Royal British Columbia Museum published a study in Science that revisited one of the most recognizable features ever assigned to Tyrannosaurus rex. Their conclusion was unexpectedly straightforward. When its mouth was closed, the animal almost certainly possessed scaly lips that completely covered its teeth, much like those of large modern lizards. Equally striking was the history behind the familiar lipless reconstruction. As the authors explained, no defining scientific study had originally demonstrated that Tyrannosaurus rex should display exposed teeth while resting. The appearance gradually spread during the 1980s and 1990s, largely because artists and illustrators favored a more intimidating look. Over time, that artistic preference became widely repeated until it was often mistaken for established scientific knowledge. The researchers approached the question through several independent lines of evidence. First, they compared the relationship between tooth size and skull length across living reptiles. The teeth of Tyrannosaurus rex proved proportionally similar to those of the Komodo dragon, a living lizard whose lips completely conceal its teeth whenever the jaws are closed. The comparison suggested there was ample room for soft tissue without requiring the teeth to remain permanently exposed. A second clue came from the enamel itself. Animals whose teeth remain uncovered experience different patterns of weathering on the outer surfaces because those areas face constant exposure. Crocodiles provide a familiar example. Their visible teeth develop distinctive wear consistent with prolonged contact with the surrounding environment. Fossil teeth from Tyrannosaurus rex lack that uneven pattern. Instead, the enamel appears protected in a manner expected if lips regularly enclose the teeth and helped shield them from drying and abrasion. The skull supplied another layer of evidence. Along the jaws are numerous tiny openings through which nerves and blood vessels once passed into surrounding soft tissues. In crocodiles, these openings follow one arrangement suited to highly sensitive exposed skin. In lizards possessing lips and gums, they follow another. The pattern preserved in Tyrannosaurus rex aligns far more closely with the lizard condition, supporting the presence of tissues covering the teeth instead of permanently exposing them. Such protection would have carried practical value throughout a remarkably long life. Current growth studies indicate that fully mature Tyrannosaurus rex continued developing until approximately 35 to 40 years of age. Unlike sharks, which replace teeth continuously throughout life, Tyrannosaurus rex depended upon each functioning tooth for extended periods before replacement occurred. Lips would have helped maintain moisture around the enamel, reducing unnecessary deterioration and preserving the strength required for years of repeated use. The revised face changes first impressions without altering the formidable animal beneath it. At rest, Tyrannosaurus rex likely appeared composed, its immense teeth concealed behind scales until the jaws opened. One of the most recognizable images in paleontology had endured for decades, shaped less by evidence than by expectation, until careful comparison finally restored a feature that had been present all along. Some scientific disagreements unfold within museum collections or remote field sites. Others spill into newspapers, documentaries, and conversations around the world. During 2023, one study transformed the image of Tyrannosaurus rex almost overnight, suggesting that the animal's mind might have been far more sophisticated than anyone had imagined. The discussion that followed became one of the most visible debates in modern paleontology. Dr. Susanna Herculano Hosel of Vanderbilt University published her research in the Journal of Comparative Neurology, estimating that Tyrannosaurus rex possessed approximately 3.3 billion neurons. Neurons are the specialized cells that transmit information throughout the brain and nervous system. Because neuron numbers often relate to processing capacity in living animals, the estimate carried remarkable implications. A modern baboon possesses roughly 6.2 billion neurons, placing the proposed total for Tyrannosaurus rex unexpectedly close to that of a primate. From those calculations emerged bold possibilities. If the estimate proved accurate, Tyrannosaurus rex might have possessed cognitive abilities far beyond traditional expectations for a reptile. Discussions expanded to include the potential for sophisticated learning, transmission of knowledge across generations, deliberate teaching behaviors, and even forms of tool use. News organizations around the world embraced the story, with many headlines suggesting that the famous predator may have rivaled a baboon in intelligence or perhaps exceeded the mental abilities of a chimpanzee. The extraordinary claim attracted equally careful examination. During April of 2024, an international team of researchers published a detailed response in the Anatomical Record. Led by Dr. Kai Kaspar of Heinrich Heine University in Dusseldorf, together with Dr. Ornella Bertrand and Dr. Christian Gutierrez Ibanez of the University of Alberta, the group attempted to reproduce the original conclusions using the same general evidence. Their analysis reached a different result because it questioned one critical assumption. The earlier study treated the cranial cavity as though it had been almost entirely occupied by brain tissue. Living reptiles present a contrasting pattern. Their brains generally fill only about 1/3 of the available cranial space, while the remaining volume contains supporting tissues and cerebrospinal fluid that cushions the brain within the skull. If Tyrannosaurus rex followed the same anatomical arrangement, the original estimate became substantially inflated. Applying a more reptile-like proportion reduced the estimated neuron count to somewhere between roughly 250 million and 1.7 billion neurons. Those values align much more closely with modern crocodilians than with primates. Even so, the responding researchers emphasized an important point that received far less public attention than the original headlines. Counting neurons alone provides an imperfect measure of intelligence, even among living animals whose behavior can be observed directly. Pigeons illustrate that limitation remarkably well. Their brains are compact, yet they contain densely packed neurons that allow impressive problem-solving abilities. Experiments have shown that pigeons can perform certain counting tasks as effectively as monkeys possessing much larger brains. Brain size and neuron totals therefore cannot predict intelligence with complete reliability. The organization of neural circuits, evolutionary history, and specialized behaviors all contribute to cognitive performance in ways that simple numbers cannot fully capture. The debate ultimately settled upon a more restrained picture. Tyrannosaurus rex most likely possessed cognition comparable to that of modern crocodilians instead of primates. That conclusion remains far from trivial. Crocodilians learn from experience, remember successful behaviors, solve practical problems, display forms of social learning, and even use sticks as bait during the nesting season of birds. Their minds are specialized rather than primitive, reminding us that fossil evidence can illuminate remarkable possibilities while still marking the boundary between careful inference and confident certainty. Behavior seldom fossilizes as clearly as bone. A footprint can hint at movement, a bite mark can preserve an instant of violence, yet daily interactions usually disappear without leaving a trace. Occasionally, however, several skeletons remain together in a way that invites a different kind of question. Their arrangement suggests companionship as much as catastrophe. For more than a century, the prevailing image of Tyrannosaurus rex was straightforward. Each adult ruled its own territory, hunted alone, and encountered others only for mating or conflict. That interpretation fit the popular image of a dominant apex predator, and for many years the available evidence offered little reason to challenge it. The first serious challenge came from Dr. Philip Currie, whose work in Alberta documented the remains of 12 tyrannosaur individuals recovered from a single locality after more than 2 decades of excavation. Such an accumulation appeared unusual, yet many researchers concluded that chance alone could explain the association. Rivers can transport bones from different places, and geological processes often rearrange ancient remains. The discovery remained intriguing without changing the broader consensus. Another site in Montana presented a similar pattern. Multiple tyrannosaurs occurred within the same geological horizon, again raising the possibility that these animals had died near one another. Once more, skepticism prevailed. Natural processes were considered sufficient to account for the concentration, leaving the long accepted solitary model largely intact. The strongest evidence emerged much farther south. Within Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument in Utah lies a locality known informally as the Rainbows and Unicorns Quarry. Dr. Alan Titus of the Bureau of Land Management first recognized its importance during 2014. After 7 years of detailed excavation and analysis, the findings appeared in Peer J on the 19th of April, 2021. The quarry preserved the remains of 4 or 5 individuals belonging to Teratophanes currii, a close relative of Tyrannosaurus rex that lived approximately 76.4 million years ago. These animals occupied the same branch of the Tyrannosaur family tree and provide valuable clues about the behavior of their larger northern relatives. Researchers carefully examined the surrounding sediment as well as the fossils themselves. Isotopic evidence indicated that a massive flash flood eventually swept the animals into a nearby lake, where they settled and remained largely undisturbed through deep time. Crucially, the geological evidence suggested the flood did not gather isolated carcasses from widely separated locations. The tyrannosaurs were already together before the flood occurred. The disaster preserved an existing association instead of creating an artificial one. Viewed individually, each site might invite caution. Considered together, they become more persuasive. Alberta, Montana, and Utah each preserve multiple tyrannosaurs found in close association across widely separated regions of North America. The repeated pattern becomes increasingly difficult to dismiss as coincidence alone. As Dr. Joe Surdick of the Denver Museum of Nature and Science observed, the Utah discovery may represent a tipping point for reconsidering how these large carnivores behaved across the northern hemisphere during the Cretaceous. Such evidence does not require imagining coordinated wolf-style hunts or rigid social hierarchies. Gregarious behavior can describe animals that travel together, tolerate one another, gather around food sources, or migrate in loose groups without maintaining constant cooperation. Even that modest revision carries profound ecological consequences. A landscape occupied by neighboring tyrannosaurs, sharing portions of their lives, differs fundamentally from one inhabited only by isolated hunters. Recent discoveries suggest that the lives of these remarkable animals were connected more often than generations of paleontologists had once imagined. Few moments from Earth's distant past can be placed upon a timeline with remarkable precision. The closing chapter of Tyrannosaurus rex belongs among them. Modern dating techniques have narrowed the age of the Chicxulub impact to approximately 66,038,000 years ago, with an uncertainty of only about 11,000 years. Against the immense span of our planet's roughly 4.5 billion year history, that margin is extraordinarily small, making this one of the most precisely dated events preserved within the geological record. Such accuracy reflects decades of careful work. Researchers compared shocked quartz, iridium enriched sediments, volcanic ash layers, and radioactive isotopes preserved around the Cretaceous Paleogene boundary. By combining these independent lines of evidence, they gradually refined a chronology that continues to sharpen with each improvement in analytical techniques. In many respects, the final days of Tyrannosaurus rex are dated more confidently than numerous events recorded during early human civilization. The object responsible was an asteroid measuring roughly 6 miles across. It struck the region now forming the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico with unimaginable force, releasing energy beyond anything produced by natural events during recorded history. Rock vaporized instantly. Molten material escaped high above the atmosphere before falling back across the globe. Sulfur-rich material and enormous quantities of debris spread through the upper atmosphere, where they remained suspended for years. Research, refined during 2022, strengthened another important conclusion. The extinction itself unfolded with geological speed. Instead of disappearing gradually across millions of years, ecosystems collapsed within roughly 10,000 to 100,000 years, an interval that represents little more than a brief instant on geological timescales. The last Tyrannosaurus rex almost certainly lived within about 33,000 years of the impact, and perhaps much closer to the catastrophe as environmental conditions deteriorated. Darkened skies interrupted photosynthesis across much of the world. Plants struggled as sunlight diminished for an estimated 2 to 8 years. Food webs that had supported entire continents began failing from their foundation upward. Large herbivores lost the vegetation upon which they depended. As those populations declined, the great carnivores that relied upon them faced an equally relentless shortage of food. Recent discoveries lend that sequence additional meaning. If Tyrannosaurus rex truly lived in social groups for at least portions of its life, those associations may have become increasingly difficult to sustain as herds dwindled. Groups of enormous predators required abundant prey distributed across the landscape. Shrinking food supplies could have fragmented those gatherings, leaving individuals to wander through an ecosystem, offering fewer opportunities with each passing season. The newest hatchling evidence deepens the picture still further. Across Laramidia, nests containing approximately 20 to 30 newly hatched Tyrannosaurus rex entered a world already changing beyond recovery. Each youngster emerged, weighing only a few pounds, already equipped with the jaws and teeth needed to begin hunting. Their lives once formed the opening chapter of a journey lasting decades, carrying a small predator toward the greatest terrestrial hunter of its age. Within roughly 33,000 years of the impact, that entire life cycle vanished. No generation after that completed the story. One final hatchling climbed from its shell, hunted briefly beneath fading forests, and left no descendants bearing the name Tyrannosaurus rex. The species disappeared, yet the evolutionary path that produced it had not reached its true conclusion. Its deeper lineage endured beyond the catastrophe, transformed into forms that still inhabit the skies of the modern world. Extinction often suggests a complete ending, a final page beyond which nothing remains. The history of Tyrannosaurus rex tells a more intricate story. Although the great predator itself disappeared, the evolutionary branch that produced it continued forward. It changed form, shrank in size, adapted to a transformed planet, and remains alive today in creatures that gather on rooftops, cross farm fields, and sing from trees each morning. Modern birds are not descendants of dinosaurs in the sense of replacing them after they vanished. Birds are dinosaurs. They represent the surviving lineage of theropod dinosaurs, the same great group that also included Tyrannosaurus rex. The relationship is closer than many people realize. On the dinosaur family tree, Tyrannosaurus rex shares a more recent common ancestor with a crow than it does with enormous long-necked dinosaurs such as Brachiosaurus. Those giant plant eaters belonged to a different branch that separated much earlier in evolutionary history. That relationship extends beyond ancestry into anatomy. Fossils of Tyrannosaurus rex preserve a wishbone formed by the fusion of paired collarbones, a feature still present in every modern bird. The respiratory system tells a similar story. Theropod dinosaurs possessed networks of air sacs connected to the lungs, allowing fresh air to move through the body with remarkable efficiency. Birds continue to rely upon that same fundamental design, making their breathing system one of the most effective among living vertebrates. The discoveries surrounding hatchling behavior strengthen this connection in an unexpected way. Evidence presented during July of 2026 indicates that newly hatched Tyrannosaurus rex emerged ready to move, explore, and capture prey almost immediately. They did not spend prolonged periods waiting for constant parental feeding. This pattern remains familiar today among many ground nesting birds. Young chickens, turkeys, and numerous shorebirds leave the nest within hours, walking confidently while searching for food alongside attentive adults. Their independence reflects a strategy inherited across immense stretches of evolutionary time. Reproduction preserves another thread linking past and present. The July discoveries suggest that Tyrannosaurus rex produced large clutches containing numerous relatively small eggs. Among living relatives outside the bird lineage, crocodilians follow a broadly similar reproductive pattern, laying substantial clutches while providing moderate parental care after hatching. Together, birds and crocodilians frame the evolutionary position occupied by Tyrannosaurus rex, preserving complementary pieces of an ancient biological heritage. Behavior also carries echoes of that ancestry. Crows and ravens rank among the most cognitively capable animals outside the primates. They recognize individual faces, remember useful locations, store food for future use, solve unfamiliar problems, and coordinate activities with other members of their group. These abilities evolved within the surviving theropod lineage. They do not demonstrate that Tyrannosaurus rex possessed identical behaviors, yet they remind us that sophisticated cognition has deep roots within this remarkable branch of dinosaur evolution. The closest living relatives of Tyrannosaurus rex are therefore neither Komodo dragons nor crocodiles alone. They are the birds sharing parks, forests, coastlines, and city streets across the modern world. Every sparrow, hawk, raven, and hummingbird carries genetic information inherited through an uninterrupted chain stretching back beyond the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction. Within those living bodies remain anatomical designs, reproductive strategies, respiratory systems, and developmental patterns once shared with an animal capable of delivering one of the most powerful bites ever produced on land. The giant itself vanished, yet many of its defining traits continued their journey into the present, carried forward on wings instead of thunderous footsteps. Progress in paleontology does not always arrive with a fresh fossil emerging from stone. Sometimes the greatest advance begins when an old specimen returns to the laboratory under a different instrument. The bones themselves remain unchanged, preserving every microscopic detail through millions of years. What changes is humanity's ability to recognize information that earlier generations could not perceive, even while holding the very same fossil in their hands. The study published during March of 2026 offers a clear example. Researchers investigating the growth of Tyrannosaurus rex relied upon polarized light microscopy, a method that reveals subtle structures concealed within fossilized bone. Growth rings that had escaped notice for decades became visible once viewed through polarized light. Nothing inside those fossils had altered since they were collected. The biological record had always existed. The technology finally became capable of exposing it. Imaging techniques have advanced just as dramatically. Computed tomography scanning now allows researchers to examine the complete interior of a fossil without cutting or damaging it. During the July of 2026 study involving the embedded tooth preserved inside an Edmontosaurus skull, this method confirmed the identity and position of the tooth while leaving the specimen untouched. Many museum collections have already benefited from such examinations, although countless fossils still await their first internal scan. Another powerful technique reaches an even finer scale. Synchrotron scanning directs intensely energetic beams through fossilized tissue, producing images that reveal microscopic architecture beyond the capabilities of conventional computed tomography. Tiny growth structures, cellular organization, and subtle patterns preserved inside mineralized bone become visible with remarkable precision. As more institutions gain access to these facilities, researchers continue uncovering biological details that previously remained beyond observation. The revolution extends beyond imaging. Paleoproteomic analysis searches fossilized bone for preserved fragments of ancient proteins, identifying molecular structures that survive far longer than scientists once believed possible. During May of 2025, research demonstrated that protein remnants recovered from Tyrannosaurus rex may contribute insights reaching well beyond paleontology. Their preserved molecular organization could even inform investigations connected with cancer biology, showing that fossils preserve valuable biochemical information alongside their familiar anatomy. Computational methods are also transforming museum research. Artificial intelligence systems trained using confirmed fossil specimens can compare enormous numbers of unidentified fragments, recognizing patterns too subtle or numerous for rapid human comparison alone. Small bones, isolated teeth, and incomplete skeletons stored for decades can now be examined with new efficiency, directing researchers toward specimens deserving closer investigation. Those overlooked collections may represent the greatest scientific opportunity of all. Natural history museums throughout the world preserve thousands of fossils resting safely within drawers, cabinets, and storage rooms. Many have never undergone computed tomography scanning, synchrotron imaging, or paleoproteomic analysis. Others received only brief descriptions when first collected before remaining untouched for generations, waiting for methods that had not yet been invented. The hatchling discovery announced during July of 2026 demonstrates this possibility with remarkable clarity. The tiny bones had not required another expedition across the Badlands. They had rested within a museum drawer for years. Their significance emerged because a researcher examined modest specimens using fresh techniques while asking different scientific questions than those posed before. The accelerating pace of discovery, therefore, reflects more than fortunate timing. Every improvement in imaging, molecular science, and computational analysis opens another layer of information preserved within familiar fossils. Each advance reminds us that many answers have been waiting inside museum collections all along, preserved with extraordinary fidelity until the right tools finally learned how to read them. A fossil appears, at first glance, to be nothing more than stone shaped like bone. Its surface seems to promise anatomy alone, preserving form while every trace of living chemistry has long since disappeared. For generations, that assumption guided paleontology. Mineral replaced tissue, organic material decayed, and whatever once flowed through the animal vanished forever. During the early years of the 21st century, one discovery challenged that expectation with surprising persistence. In 2005, Dr. Mary Schweitzer of North Carolina State University reported an unexpected observation from the interior of a Tyrannosaurus rex femur. After the surrounding minerals were carefully removed from portions of the fossil, flexible, translucent structures resembling blood vessels remained. They did not behave like ordinary mineral deposits. Instead, they stretched and bent in ways that seemed inconsistent with conventional ideas about fossil preservation. The announcement met immediate skepticism. The prevailing understanding held that original organic material could not survive for approximately 66 million years. Proteins degrade, cells break apart, biological tissues disappear as fossilization transforms living structures into rock. If the reported material truly represented remnants of the original animal, then established assumptions about long-term preservation required careful re-examination. Dr. Schweitzer and her colleagues continued investigating the specimen using mass spectrometry, a technique capable of identifying molecular fragments through their chemical signatures. Their analysis detected protein sequences resembling collagen, the structural protein that forms much of the framework within bone. Even more intriguing, the identified sequences showed structural similarities to collagen found in modern chickens, an observation consistent with the evolutionary relationship linking birds and theropod dinosaurs. Alternative explanations soon followed. Several researchers argued that the flexible structures were more likely bacterial biofilms created by microorganisms that colonized the fossil long after burial. Under this interpretation, the material represented later biological activity rather than surviving tissue from the dinosaur itself. The disagreement became one of the most closely examined scientific debates in modern paleontology, encouraging increasingly sophisticated methods of analysis. Fresh evidence emerged during 2017 when a separate investigation, published in Nature Communications, examined a different Tyrannosaurus rex specimen using independent analytical techniques. The researchers identified organic compounds that appeared to be endogenous, meaning they originated within the dinosaur rather than entering the fossil from outside after burial. Although this result did not resolve every question, it strengthened the possibility that portions of the original biochemistry can persist far longer than previously believed. The field continued advancing. During May of 2025, increasingly refined paleoproteomic methods recovered additional molecular information from dinosaur fossils. These preserved protein fragments attracted attention beyond paleontology because their structures may contribute to research exploring the biology of diseases, including cancer. Ancient fossils, therefore, became valuable not only for reconstructing extinct animals, but also for understanding fundamental processes within living cells. By July of 2026, the discussion had changed noticeably. The possibility that original molecular material survives inside certain dinosaur fossils was no longer dismissed as impossible. Instead, researchers concentrated on determining exactly which compounds endure, how they remain preserved for immense spans of time, and what reliable information they can provide. Those questions remain active areas of investigation rather than settled conclusions. Even if future discoveries confirm extensive molecular preservation, they do not lead toward the vision popularized by fiction. Deoxyribonucleic acid does not survive intact for tens of millions of years, and no evidence suggests that Tyrannosaurus rex could ever be revived. The true significance is subtler. Portions of an animal's original biochemistry may still rest inside fossil bone, offering a genuine molecular connection to a creature that lived long before the earliest human ancestors ever walked upright. Maps of the modern world offer little guidance when imagining the homeland of Tyrannosaurus rex. The continents occupied familiar latitudes, yet their outlines belonged to a different age. Across the middle of North America stretched a broad inland sea that divided the continent into two separate landmasses, replacing the continuous landscape known today with a long ribbon of western terrain bordered by water and rising mountains. That inland sea, known as the Western Interior Seaway, reached from the Gulf of Mexico northward to the Arctic Ocean. Warm, shallow waters covered thousands of miles, separating eastern Appalachia from western Laramidia. Upon that western landmass lived Tyrannosaurus rex, occupying a narrow continent that extended from present-day Alaska to what is now Mexico. To the east lay the inland sea. Along the western horizon, the early ancestors of the Rocky Mountains gradually lifted the landscape, shaping rivers, floodplains, and forests that supported an extraordinary variety of life. The climate differed profoundly from the modern world. There were no permanent polar ice caps, and global temperatures averaged roughly 14 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than those experienced today. Moisture circulated through broad coastal plains, feeding dense forests, swamps, and wetlands across much of Laramidia. Flowering plants spread beneath towering conifers, while ferns and other low vegetation formed thick cover across the forest floor. Within this setting lay the region now preserved as the Hell Creek Formation. These rocks record approximately the final 2 million years of the Cretaceous period, preserving the closing chapter of the ecosystem inhabited by Tyrannosaurus rex. The embedded tooth identified during the July of 2026 study emerged from this remarkable geological archive, connecting a single fossil injury to one of the last living communities before the Great Extinction. Life crowded every level of that landscape. More than 40 dinosaur species are presently known from the Hell Creek Formation alone. Above them flew pterosaurs, while crocodilians drifted through rivers beside turtles, fish, frogs, lizards, and snakes. Small mammals occupied burrows and dense vegetation, living among giants while following ecological paths that would eventually shape the future of life after the extinction. The newly recognized hatchlings entered this environment at its most vulnerable stage. Weighing only about 5.5 pounds, they emerged into vegetation dense with insects, small reptiles, mammals, and other prey suitable for a growing predator. At the same time, numerous larger hunters could easily capture a young tyrannosaur before it reached even a fraction of its adult size. Survival during those early years depended upon mobility, alertness, and the independence suggested by the recent hatchling research. Beyond the eastern shoreline, another community of apex predators ruled the inland sea. Mosasaurs pursued prey through warm marine waters, while plesiosaurs and enormous predatory fish occupied neighboring habitats. The result was a continent where dominant hunters controlled both land and sea, separated only by shifting coastlines and river deltas. Farther north, seasonal patterns introduced another challenge. Extended intervals of reduced winter daylight likely lowered the activity of many prey species. Such conditions fit well with the growing picture of a predator capable of extracting nourishment from marrow within stored carcasses, extending the value of a successful hunt across lean periods when opportunities became less frequent. Laramidia itself has vanished. The inland sea withdrew, the forests disappeared, and every member of that remarkable ecosystem passed into history. Even so, its bones continue speaking across immense spans of time, allowing each new discovery to place Tyrannosaurus rex within a world that grows more detailed each year, even as it grows more distant. There is an unusual paradox at the heart of the story of Tyrannosaurus rex. Few extinct animals have been examined with greater dedication. More than a century of excavation, thousands of scientific papers, and generations of researchers have transformed it into one of the best documented prehistoric creatures ever discovered. Even so, during July of 2026, paleontologists confirmed for the first time what its hatchlings actually looked like, while another study recognized evidence of a hunting encounter preserved inside a museum fossil that had rested in collections for years. These discoveries reveal a pattern extending beyond individual mistakes. The history of Tyrannosaurus rex shows how scientific understanding can become shaped by assumptions that seem reasonable, then gradually become accepted so completely that they are rarely questioned. The exposed teeth, often shown in artistic reconstructions, spread because they produced a memorable and dramatic appearance. The image became familiar through illustrations, documentaries, toys, and films until it appeared almost inseparable from the animal itself. Ideas about behavior followed a similar path. A solitary predator matched familiar expectations about the largest hunter in its environment. The picture seemed logical, and available evidence offered little reason to challenge it. Only after multiple fossil sites accumulated, together with fresh analytical methods and renewed attention, did a more complicated possibility begin receiving serious consideration. The earlier interpretation did not arise from carelessness. It reflected the best inferences available at the time. The hatchling discovery illustrates another side of the same process. Tiny bones rarely command the attention given to towering skeletons or enormous skulls. Small specimens often remain stored for years, while larger fossils become the focus of research, exhibition, and public fascination. The overlooked drawer became important only because someone decided that modest fragments deserved the same careful attention as celebrated discoveries displayed in museum galleries. Culture also influences the pace of scientific change. Popular images can spread around the world much faster than new evidence. Once a familiar picture becomes deeply established, challenging it requires more than presenting additional data. It asks both scientists and the public to reconsider ideas that have gradually come to feel obvious. The widely recognized image of Tyrannosaurus rex gained authority through repetition as much as through evidence, allowing artistic convention and scientific interpretation to become closely intertwined. Paleontology is far from unique in this respect. The history of geology offers a striking comparison. Continental drift, the foundation of modern plate tectonics, spent decades facing resistance despite accumulating evidence. The concept of fixed continents had become deeply rooted within geological thinking, encouraging many capable researchers to interpret new observations within the older framework. Only after multiple lines of evidence converged did the scientific picture shift toward the model accepted today. The history of Tyrannosaurus rex follows a comparable structure. Most incorrect assumptions did not emerge from poor science. They developed through careful reasoning based upon incomplete information. Those reasonable conclusions gradually hardened into confidence before the necessary tools existed to examine them more thoroughly. When better techniques finally arrived, they tested beliefs that had remained largely unchallenged for decades. That pattern carries an encouraging lesson. Scientific knowledge grows by inviting correction whenever stronger evidence appears. Confidence is valuable because it organizes understanding, yet every conclusion remains open to refinement when new observations emerge. The continuing revisions surrounding Tyrannosaurus rex demonstrate that even the most familiar subjects can contain unanswered questions. Waiting patiently until fresh methods reveal details that earlier generations could not yet see. One animal has become an unexpected measure of how much remains beyond our knowledge. Among all the great dinosaurs, Tyrannosaurus rex possesses one of the richest fossil records ever assembled for a large extinct vertebrate. More than 100 specimens have been identified, including roughly 32 well-preserved adult skeletons. For a giant non-avian dinosaur, this represents an extraordinary abundance of evidence, a level of preservation unmatched by nearly every other species from the distant past. Even with that remarkable record, fundamental questions remained unanswered until very recently. The appearance and size of newly hatched Tyrannosaurus rex became securely established only during July of 2026. The refined understanding of its growth and lifespan emerged during March of the same year. For decades, fossils now interpreted as belonging to a separate species were widely regarded as juvenile Tyrannosaurus rex. Reconstructions of its face favored permanently exposed teeth for many years before evidence suggested otherwise. Estimates of its maximum body size expanded dramatically as additional discoveries accumulated, while calculations of bite force grew several times greater than earlier scientific models had predicted. None of these revisions reflects failure. Together, they illustrate how scientific understanding develops whenever better evidence, improved methods, and fresh perspectives converge. The animal itself never changed. Only the picture assembled around it became clearer, piece by piece, as overlooked details entered the conversation and long accepted assumptions were tested once more. That realization carries important consequences beyond a single species. If an animal represented by more than 100 known specimens continued yielding major revisions after more than a century of study, it becomes reasonable to wonder about species known from far less evidence. Many extinct animals are represented by only a handful of fossils. Some exist as little more than isolated bones, scattered teeth, or fragments recovered from a single location. Their histories remain far more incomplete than that of Tyrannosaurus rex, even if the missing pieces are not immediately obvious. The most revealing example remains the hatchling discovery. The tiny bones had already been collected, preserved, and stored inside a museum collection. They were available to every qualified researcher who examined that archive. Their importance emerged because someone approached familiar material with renewed attention, asking different questions while applying techniques unavailable to previous generations. The breakthrough depended less upon finding something new in the field than upon recognizing significance in something already present. That possibility extends across natural history museums throughout the world. Cabinets and storage rooms contain immense collections gathered over many decades, preserving fossils that have never received advanced imaging, molecular analysis, or detailed comparison with recently discovered material. Some specimens have been described only briefly since their arrival. Others still await formal scientific study altogether. Every drawer represents an opportunity for observations that cannot yet be predicted. The fossil record, therefore, differs from a completed library whose contents are already understood. It resembles an archive that has only begun revealing its full complexity. Each year, additional techniques illuminate information concealed within specimens collected long ago, steadily enlarging the examined portion of a much greater whole. The boundaries of knowledge continue moving outward, not because the past is changing, but because the methods used to explore it continue becoming more capable. Viewed through that lens, Tyrannosaurus rex becomes more than the story of a single predator. It becomes evidence that even the best known corners of prehistory still contain discoveries waiting patiently within collections, inviting another careful look from eyes prepared to notice what earlier generations could not yet see. Some discoveries remain within scientific journals, appreciated mainly by specialists who devote their lives to a particular field. Tyrannosaurus rex followed a different path. Since its formal description during 1905, it has become more than a fossil. It has appeared in museums across continents, filled the pages of children's books, inspired countless films, and generated more scientific research than any other extinct animal. Across 121 years, it has become one of the most recognizable creatures ever to inhabit the human imagination. Its popularity is often explained by its position at the top of its ecosystem. It was among the largest terrestrial predators ever known, equipped with extraordinary jaws and senses refined through millions of years of evolution. Those qualities certainly helped establish its reputation. Even so, they do not entirely explain why this particular dinosaur occupies such a singular place in culture. Other extinct predators possessed equally remarkable adaptations. Mosasaurs transformed the seas into realms of immense danger, while Spinosaurus reached even greater body length. Neither has drawn humanity into the same enduring fascination. Part of the answer may lie in what Tyrannosaurus rex represents. It stands near the practical limits of predatory life on land, an animal whose body appears shaped toward one overwhelming purpose. Massive muscles, crushing jaws, powerful legs, and exceptional sensory abilities combined into a form that seems almost like an experiment in how formidable a terrestrial hunter could become. It marks one possible boundary of natural design, inviting people to imagine the greatest physical power evolution could assemble before the age of mammals. The discoveries of 2026 have softened that image without diminishing it. The giant hunter, familiar to generations of museum visitors, began life weighing only about 5.5 pounds. It entered a landscape where many larger animals could easily consume it before adulthood. Growth required decades, carrying the animal through changing diets, changing risks, and changing roles within its environment. Reproduction depended upon laying large clutches of eggs, while only a fraction of offspring likely survived to maturity. Evidence now suggests a more socially complex existence than earlier portrayals allowed. Even the face appears different, framed by protective lips instead of permanently exposed teeth. Those revisions do more than improve anatomical accuracy. They reshape the narrative people have attached to the animal for generations. The familiar cultural image emphasized immediate menace, constant aggression, and solitary dominance, because those qualities created memorable stories. The fossil evidence now presents a creature with a richer biography, one that experienced vulnerability before strength, gradual development before mastery, and ordinary biological challenges shared by countless forms of life across Earth's history. Every adjustment to that portrait reflects another adjustment in the stories people choose to tell. Scientific discoveries replace inherited assumptions, yet they also reveal why those assumptions proved attractive in the first place. Humans often favor simple symbols over complicated realities, especially when confronting creatures separated from us by immense spans of time. The deeper the evidence becomes, the more layered the story grows. Seen from that perspective, Tyrannosaurus rex becomes more than an extinct predator. It serves as a meeting place between evidence and imagination, where each new fossil invites another conversation between the world that existed and the one people constructed around it. As that conversation continues, the dinosaur remains familiar while steadily becoming someone we have never fully met before, reminding us that understanding the distant past has always included learning something unexpected about ourselves. A single life now comes into focus through countless fragments gathered across more than a century of research. No skeleton preserves the complete story. No individual fossil contains every answer. Instead, the portrait emerges from hatchling bones, healed injuries, buried footprints, microscopic growth rings, preserved proteins, and museum specimens that waited decades before revealing their importance. Together, they describe an animal more intricate than the familiar icon that first captured the world's imagination. Its life began inside a nest containing perhaps 20 to 30 eggs. When one hatchling emerged, it measured roughly 30 inches in length and weighed only about 5.5 pounds. Even at that size, its jaws already carried broad, durable teeth capable of crushing small bones. Wear marks suggest those teeth entered demanding use almost immediately. There was little time for prolonged dependence. From its earliest days, it hunted small prey across a landscape where countless larger predators viewed it as prey in return. Growth continued for approximately 40 years. Each season added new weight, stronger muscles, and changing proportions. Slender juvenile teeth gradually gave way to the thick, reinforced dentition that later defined the adult animal. Bones strengthened as the skeleton responded to increasing size, while experience accumulated alongside physical development. Evidence gathered from multiple fossil sites suggests these animals may have spent at least portions of their lives in social proximity instead of existing as permanently isolated hunters. A fully mature individual may have reached nearly 49 feet in length and, according to recent biomechanical modeling, perhaps as much as 15 tons in weight. Protective lips enclosed the teeth when the mouth rested, preserving their condition until the moment of a strike. Those jaws generated extraordinary pressure, approaching 431,000 pounds per square inch at the tips of individual teeth. Fossils now preserve encounters in which attacks targeted the skull itself, driving teeth deep enough into nasal bone that one snapped and remained embedded until healing surrounded it. Bone formed an ordinary part of the diet, with marrow providing nourishment long after softer tissue disappeared. Within that immense body rested a brain comparable in capability to that of modern crocodilians, supporting sensory awareness and behavior suited to a complex predator. Increasing evidence points toward a life shaped by repeated interaction with other tyrannosaurs, while neighboring species occupied their own ecological roles. Nanotyrannus appears to have followed a different path through the same environment, pursuing smaller prey with a lighter build. Around them lived armored herbivores, horned giants, duck-billed grazers, and herd animals whose defenses, communication, and social organization evolved under continual predatory pressure. This entire world disappeared within roughly 33,000 years after an asteroid about 6 miles across struck near the present day Yucatan Peninsula. Forests changed, food webs collapsed, and the last Tyrannosaurus rex vanished with the closing moments of the Cretaceous. Even after that ending, its earliest life remained unknown until hatchling bones, resting in museum collections, finally received the attention they deserved many years later. The lineage itself never ended completely, continuing through birds that still inhabit every continent today. This is the animal, as science understands it. During July of 2026, it began as a vulnerable hatchling, matured through decades of steady growth, lived within a richly populated ecosystem, possessed immense physical power balanced by biological complexity, and left descendants still filling the skies. The legend remains impressive. The evidence has revealed something even richer. Not an icon shaped by expectation, but a living creature whose true story continues to emerge from the stone. Knowledge often creates the comforting impression of completion. A familiar animal seems fully understood because its image has become so deeply woven into science, museums, books, and memory. Yet the closer the evidence is examined, the more its edges dissolve into unanswered detail. The outline grows sharper, even as the empty spaces surrounding it become easier to recognize. Today, science possesses the shapes of approximately 32 well-preserved adult Tyrannosaurus rex skeletons, together with many additional partial specimens that expand the picture further. Those fossils reveal how the animal stood, how its muscles attached to bone, how injuries healed, and how its body changed through decades of growth. Recent discoveries have finally illuminated the beginning of that journey, confirming the approximate size of a newly hatched individual and bringing the earliest chapter of its life into clearer focus than ever before. Beyond those achievements stretches another landscape, one defined by absence instead of certainty. No fossil has yet revealed how Tyrannosaurus rex communicated with others of its kind. Sound may have played an important role. Color could have carried information through skin or feathers during particular stages of life. Chemical signals remain another possibility. Perhaps communication combined several methods at once, producing interactions far richer than any single line of evidence can presently reveal. The structure of its apparent social groups also remains uncertain. Individuals may have gathered only during specific periods, or relationships may have persisted across many years. Young animals could have associated differently from adults, while breeding seasons may have altered ordinary patterns of movement. Fossils preserve moments, never complete lifetimes, leaving many details beyond direct observation. The earliest months remain especially difficult to reconstruct. Hatchlings certainly faced immense danger, yet their precise survival rate during the first year cannot presently be measured. Countless nests disappeared without leaving recognizable traces. Countless young predators lived lives too brief to enter the fossil record. Their stories vanished almost entirely, leaving only the faintest statistical echoes within the rocks. There are deeper mysteries that fossils alone may never answer. No skeleton can describe the experience of moving through a Cretaceous forest. Bones cannot reveal exactly what scents reached its nostrils, how distant footsteps sounded through damp ground, or which subtle movements drew its attention before a hunt began. Anatomy offers remarkable clues about the senses, but experience itself remains forever, beyond direct recovery. The final year of the last Tyrannosaurus rex also rests beyond certainty. As ecosystems unraveled following the great asteroid impact, food became increasingly difficult to find and familiar habitats transformed. Whether the animal perceived those changes as anything beyond ordinary hardship cannot be known. The last member of its species disappeared without leaving a witness. Perhaps 2.5 billion Tyrannosaurus rex individuals lived across millions of years, yet only about 32 well preserved adult skeletons remain. That extraordinary imbalance defines the true scale of what has been lost. Most lives ended without preserving a single bone that could survive into the present, placing enormous portions of their history forever beyond discovery. Even so, recent years have offered a different perspective. Hatchling bones waited inside museum drawers. An embedded tooth remained within a skull preserved in Bozeman. Hidden growth rings rested inside fossils, examined many times before. The unknown surrounding Tyrannosaurus rex is therefore not fixed. It grows smaller through patience, careful observation, and the willingness to notice overlooked evidence that has been waiting all along for the right question to bring it into the light. Time changes the meaning of every story. A human lifetime can seem immense while it is being lived, yet it becomes almost invisible beside the history of a species, and that history becomes equally small when placed beside the age of Earth itself. The life of Tyrannosaurus rex belongs within that larger scale, where familiar measures begin to lose their ordinary meaning and geology becomes the calendar. Current evidence suggests that Tyrannosaurus rex existed as a distinct species for approximately 2,500,000 years. By comparison, anatomically modern humans have existed for roughly 300,000 years. Measured only by the duration of each species, Tyrannosaurus rex endured for more than 8 times as long as humanity has existed so far. Countless generations lived, hunted, reproduced, and disappeared before the final chapter arrived. The ending came approximately 66,038,000 years ago, when an asteroid about 6 miles across struck the region, now known as the Yucatan Peninsula. That event rests so deeply within Earth's history that ordinary imagination struggles to grasp the distance separating that world from our own. Entire mountain ranges have risen and worn away since then. Oceans have changed their boundaries. Forests have appeared, vanished, and returned in different forms. Every familiar landscape belongs to a planet transformed many times over. One comparison helps place that distance into perspective. Imagine Earth's 4,500,000,000 year history compressed into a single day, lasting 24 hours. Within that day, the entire existence of Tyrannosaurus rex would occupy only about 32 seconds before midnight. The span during which human beings have discovered, collected, debated, and studied its fossils would amount to less than 2 seconds. Nearly everything we know has been assembled during that fleeting interval. Within those few symbolic seconds, paleontologists have attempted to reconstruct the lives of perhaps 2.5 billion individual animals. Almost all vanished without leaving recoverable remains. From that immense population, approximately 32 well-preserved adult skeletons now carry much of the responsibility for representing an entire species. Each new fossil, each improved technique, and each careful re-examination changes the portrait a little more, bringing the living animal into sharper focus than before. That process continues today. Polarized light microscopy has revealed growth patterns that remained unnoticed inside familiar bones. Computed tomography scanners continue uncovering details concealed within fossilized skulls and skeletons. Museum collections still contain specimens awaiting renewed attention from researchers equipped with questions that earlier generations could not yet ask. The pace may appear gradual, yet every careful observation expands the boundary of understanding. These revisions should never be mistaken for weakness. They demonstrate science functioning exactly as it should, advancing until it reaches the limits of available evidence, then moving those limits a little farther through patience, technology, and repeated examination. Each correction reflects greater precision, not diminishing confidence, but refining it. The Cretaceous world remains profoundly distant from modern experience. Continents occupied different positions. An inland sea divided North America. Climates followed unfamiliar patterns, and ecosystems unfolded beneath skies unlike those above us today. Even across that extraordinary gulf, fragments preserved within stone have allowed scientists to reconstruct something authentic. The picture remains unfinished, yet each generation inherits a portrait more faithful than the one before, proving that truth can emerge gradually from the smallest surviving traces of an almost unimaginable past. Understanding often begins with something unexpectedly small. After countless pages of research, enormous skeletons displayed beneath museum ceilings, and decades of debate, one of the most significant discoveries of 2026 rested within a fossil no larger than a human thumb. It was only part of a third metatarsal, the long bone of a hatchling foot. Its size invited little attention for many years. Its importance remained hidden until someone finally examined it with the care it deserved. Within that tiny bone lay delicate vascular channels, preserved as mineral traces after 66 million years. They marked the pathways through which blood once flowed into living tissue, nourishing an animal whose body was growing with extraordinary speed. The porous structure revealed youth with remarkable clarity. This was not the foot of an older juvenile. It belonged to an individual that had entered the world only a short time before its life ended. The fossil carried that information from the moment it formed, wading through unimaginable spans of time until science possessed both the tools and the curiosity to recognize its meaning. Another specimen preserved an entirely different instant. Deep inside the nasal bone of an Edmontosaurus skull remained the broken tip of a Tyrannosaur tooth. It still occupied the precise position where tremendous force had driven it during a violent encounter 66 million years ago. Healing never removed it because the victim did not survive. The hunter lost part of its tooth. The prey carried that fragment into the ground. Sediment buried both together, preserving the final moment of their meeting until researchers, studying a museum specimen in Bozeman, recognized what had remained there all along. Elsewhere, the leg bones of 17 Tyrannosaur specimens held another record entirely. Their annual growth rings passed unnoticed beneath ordinary examination, blending into the fossilized structure of the bone itself. Polarized light microscopy revealed patterns that standard illumination could not distinguish. Each ring represented another completed year in the life of a living animal, allowing researchers to reconstruct growth across approximately 4 decades. Time itself had been written into the skeleton, although the writing required entirely new ways of seeing before it became legible. These fossils deserve attention for one important reason. They are not symbolic representations created by artists or simplified models assembled for display. They are genuine parts of living creatures that once crossed floodplains, hunted through forests, rested beneath unfamiliar constellations, and left footprints upon ground now transformed into modern landscapes. Every preserved surface once belonged to skin, muscle, blood, or bone inside a breathing animal. For millions of years, those remains carried information that no living creature could interpret. Mineral replaced tissue while preserving microscopic details beyond ordinary sight. The evidence remained secure through continental change, mountain building, erosion, burial, and discovery. It waited until a species emerged that could invent polarized microscopes, computed tomography scanners, molecular analysis, and countless other methods capable of translating stone into biological history. Humanity became that reader, although the language is still being learned. Every newly examined specimen expands a vocabulary that did not exist for earlier generations. Each overlooked drawer, forgotten fragment, or familiar skeleton holds the possibility of another sentence waiting to be understood. The bones continue carrying their stories across deep time with remarkable patience, revealing them only as our own patience, imagination, and understanding gradually become equal to the task of listening. Progress does not always arrive with the discovery of a spectacular fossil emerging from stone. Sometimes it begins with a cabinet opened in a familiar museum, a specimen lifted from storage, or an old observation examined through a different lens. The history of Tyrannosaurus rex gained another chapter during July of 2026 through moments exactly like these, reminding us that discovery often depends as much upon attention as it does upon excavation. For more than 120 years, scientists had studied this remarkable animal from nearly every imaginable direction. Its skeleton had been measured, reconstructed, debated, and compared. Thousands of scientific papers had refined its anatomy and behavior. Even so, two studies transformed the picture once again. One illuminated the opening hours of its life through the tiny bones of a hatchling. Another revealed new detail about the force and mechanics of a fatal bite preserved inside the skull of its prey. Neither finding required uncovering an entirely new dinosaur from untouched rock. The evidence had already been collected. The hatchling specimen rested inside a museum drawer. The broken tooth remained embedded within fossilized bone. Those objects had survived millions of years before entering scientific collections, where they waited through additional decades until someone returned with different questions and better methods. The discoveries emerged because familiar specimens received unfamiliar attention. That distinction carries meaning, extending well beyond paleontology. Human knowledge is often imagined as a wall steadily rising, each new fact placed neatly upon the last. Reality resembles a landscape filled with overlooked paths. Evidence accumulates faster than any generation can completely examine it. New instruments reveal patterns hidden from earlier technology. Fresh perspectives uncover relationships that previous investigators never considered. Progress, therefore, depends upon curiosity directed toward places that appear ordinary. The lesson reaches into many other fields. Medicine preserves countless biological samples gathered for one purpose before later revealing another. Physics revisits old observations as instruments become more precise. Archaeology repeatedly returns to collections assembled decades earlier, discovering details invisible to earlier researchers. Knowledge grows through accumulation, yet understanding advances whenever someone recognizes that an old collection may still contain unanswered questions. The revisions to Tyrannosaurus rex during 2026 therefore represent no failure of science. They demonstrate its greatest strength. Scientific conclusions remain open to refinement whenever stronger evidence or improved techniques become available. Confidence rests upon that willingness to revise, not upon the illusion that every answer arrived complete from the beginning. Each correction brings the living animal into closer agreement with reality. even while acknowledging that further adjustments almost certainly remain ahead. There is also something deeply human within this process. Attention is a limited resource. Every museum stores more specimens than any individual researcher can study across a lifetime. Every collection reflects countless choices about which questions deserve immediate effort and which can wait. Occasionally, one overlooked object proves capable of reshaping an entire conversation. Its importance becomes visible only because someone pauses long enough to examine what others had passed by. For 66 million years, those fossils preserved their information without changing. Stone held its record with unwavering patience. A drawer protected one specimen, a museum shelf preserved another. Eventually, a researcher looked closely enough to recognize what had always been present. That sequence offers a lasting reminder that discovery often begins with neither fortune nor spectacle, but with careful attention directed towards something small, familiar, and patiently waiting to be understood. There was a final mourning for the species, although no record preserves its light. Somewhere across Laramidia, approximately 66 million and 38,000 years ago, allowing for a margin of about 11,000 years, the last Tyrannosaurus rex drew its final breath. The place is unknown, the season is unknown. No fossil identifies that individual, and no layer of stone announces that this life marked the closing page of a lineage that had endured for roughly 2,500,000 years. Nothing distinguished that animal from countless others that had lived before it. It may have been young, still carrying many years of growth ahead. It may have reached full maturity after decades of survival. Perhaps it searched familiar hunting grounds one final time. Perhaps it rested among others of its kind, or perhaps it wandered alone. The fossil record offers no certainty. It preserves only the knowledge that eventually one individual remained, and when that life ended, the species ended with it. The broader family continued in another direction. Birds carried the deeper lineage forward, their bones reshaped across millions of years into forms adapted for flight, forests, wetlands, mountains, and oceans. Even so, Tyrannosaurus rex itself never returned. Its particular combination of anatomy, behavior, history, and inheritance belonged to one branch whose course reached its conclusion on a continent that has since changed beyond recognition. During this journey through the evidence, that vanished animal has gradually become clearer. Science now understands that its life began inside an egg, emerging as a hatchling smaller than a house cat. It spent approximately 40 years growing toward extraordinary size. Its teeth transformed as it matured. Protective lips enclosed those teeth until the jaws opened. Powerful bites crushed bone with unmatched force among known land animals. Increasing evidence points toward lives that included social association. Deep inside a museum specimen in Montana, the broken tip of one tooth still rests where it entered the skull of its prey during a hunt that ended 66 million years ago. Even these discoveries remain only part of a larger story. Today, we understand more about Tyrannosaurus rex than anyone understood a year earlier. A year from now, careful research may reveal details that are still invisible to us. The portrait continues changing because the evidence continues speaking through methods unavailable to previous generations. The familiar image, first assembled after the species, was described during 1905, reflected the best information available at that time. Later generations refined that picture again, including the version carried into homes around the world through popular films during the late 20th century. Those reconstructions were sincere efforts to understand an extraordinary animal. They changed because new evidence arrived, and because old evidence revealed new meaning when examined with greater care. Museum drawers continue holding overlooked specimens. Polarized light microscopy continues uncovering hidden records of growth. Molecular studies continue extracting biological information from fossilized bone. Each advance reminds us that discovery often begins with patient observation directed towards something already within reach. The story of Tyrannosaurus rex therefore remains unfinished. Its bones continue offering fragments of lives separated from us by almost unimaginable spans of time. They have carried those fragments across 66 million years with remarkable endurance. We have only recently begun learning how to read them, and with every careful observation, the distance between stone and living history grows a little smaller, one thoughtful discovery at a time.